Thank you. Welcome back from lunch, everyone, and thank you to our lunch sponsor, the Daily Racing Farm. Muchas gracias a todos y bienvenido y espero que hayan disfrutado de su almuerzo con nuestro patrocinador, el Daily Racing Farm. Here's an interesting piece of trivia about the Daily Racing Farm that you may not know about. The phrase Triple Crown was commonly inserted in race reporting by Charles Hatton of the Daily Racing Farm.
And a little more trivia for the, and by the way, in your Spanish, I understood absolutely everything. Well, Daily Racing Form, I understood. The rest I did not, but I got the gist. I understood. Yeah, a little more trivia about the Preakness. A lot of people think it was always run in Baltimore. It's not the case. It was once run in the Bronx, and 15 times the Preakness was run on Coney Island. So it's got a pretty big history with Brooklyn as well as Baltimore. And another piece, a very important piece of trivia for the Preakness Stakes is that the name of the winner of the 2017 Preakness is Always Dreaming.
You have the winner.
I hope I have the winner, yes.
Okay, so this year we may have another Triple Crown.
Yeah, you know, that'd be okay by me, brother.
It will be okay for me to announce it too. Speaking of the Preakness, the trophy presented to the winner owner called the Woodlawn Base is the most valuable trophy in all sport. It's estimated today at the value of $2.4 million. Quería decirle también algo en español. El Woodlawn Base, que fue inaugurado prácticamente en 1917. Este trofeo está prácticamente el dueño del ejemplar que logre Always Dreamer, que logre ganar el Preakness State, se quedaría con él durante todo un año, durante una tradición, y su precio está estimado aproximadamente en $2.4 millones.
Now that I understand in Spanish, 2.4 million translates as mucho. And I hope I get a little piece of that mucho. Very good. Thank you, Luis. Muchas gracias, señor. Tonight we're going to be enjoying the Museum of Natural History here in Washington as guests of the Stronach Group, who are presenting the Preakness Stakes Celebration Dinner tonight. So that's tonight. Let's get back to our program. Right now, our presenter, who has literally been just across the hall. And by the way, our attendees here, if you can make some more room at the tables for those coming from across the hall, I'll tell you about them in just a minute. Our presenter, again, for the last few days has been working with the International Forum for Aftercare of Racehorses, known as IFAR. This is a new gathering of racing executives and aftercare enthusiasts and administrators who are working toward global solutions for thoroughbred retraining, adoption, and aftercare. From the organization's mission and objectives to connecting aftercare and horse players, to accreditation and standards for aftercare providers, to establishing new aftercare programs across the globe, IFAR has been very busy working on a topic that all of the industry needs to embrace. We'll now hear about its origins, its mission and objectives from the meeting and its visions for the future. Please welcome the Chief Executive of Retraining of Racehorses and IFAR Chair, Di Arbuthnot. Welcome, Di.
Thank you all so much. Thank you particularly to the Jockey Club, to Jim and Andrew who have worked so hard to get this conference here today, and most of all, Godolphin. If it wasn't for Godolphin, we would not be here. They are responsible for getting together IFAR. And actually, even for us in ROR in those very early days, they were one of the first big owners to really support ROR. So a huge, huge thank you to Godolphin. Now I'd like to just introduce a short video, and then we'll fire away. Thank you.
The International Forum for Aftercare of Racehorses was established earlier this year. The Jockey Club's a proud member. There's a number of organizations around the world that have immediately begun to support it. We see aftercare as a hugely important issue for this industry. Horses live a long time, and we want to make sure that they're provided the best care and welfare for the rest of their lives.
This group of people have really put their heads together, and they've come up with the name and the concept of the International Forum for the Aftercare of Racehorses, and it's exciting. This is about moving forward in this space to making sure that we can tell our stories and making sure that the welfare of horses remains our #1 priority.
The industry that we're specifically involved in here with Godolphin is the thoroughbred racing industry. It is completely international, and the aftercare providers, the governing bodies, we all understand that these horses are our future, and we have a real responsibility of duty of care to them as well.
The very important thing is that obviously we all work together, because otherwise we're reinventing the wheel the whole time, and there's great advances made in some countries that we can all learn from. If we don't do this, it is a big risk to our sport. We're passionate about the horses, we're passionate about racing, and if we don't really get a grip of this globally, then that is a major risk to us.
Someone once told me a while ago, someone who's involved in animal welfare, and they said, we want horses to have jobs, because when horses have jobs, they're going to be well cared for. They're not going to be an afterthought. And that's one of the reasons why we so much support IFAR and other organizations that have those common goals.
So why does welfare matter? Yes, it matters. We all have a shared responsibility for the welfare of racehorses, which extends beyond the track. Across the entire animal welfare debate, the spotlight is on animals' quality of life and the emerging concept of a life worth living. We are nothing and nowhere without the horse. Can we really stand here and proactively get this message across and not be reactive? What is the public perception? If there's one thing that's really come across over the last 24 hours when there's been plenty of discussion in another room, it's public perception. And at home, actually in 2013, following our Grand National, which I'm sure a lot of you have seen, massive crowd, and there was a study done after that 29% thought that that race should be scrapped. 19% thought that there shouldn't be racing. And the television pundit came on 2 weeks ago, and when asked about the Grand National, he didn't talk about the winner, he talked about the fact that there were no fatalities. That's what's got people talking. You can't dismiss these extremists. They are serious, and they're such a growing threat to the horse racing industry. Disruption by these has to be, we've got to do something about this. And nobody recognizes this more, particularly those in Australia that had so much problem with the greyhound racing. And Elliot made such a good case for this yesterday. We really need to do more. Public perception, if that's one thing we have to work on as an industry. Actually, I have a daughter who's quite young, and well, she's in her 20s, and she has turned vegan, and she questions racing. That's on my own doorstep. So we have a big problem out there. There's a lot of people out there questioning horse racing. Do racehorses deserve a second career? Yes, of course they do. You know, I've sort of did a quick study, and at home, 96% can have an active life after racing. Those are for horses that are able, physically and mentally, that can do another job. So you can see they're versatile, they're intelligent, they're adaptable, they can do another job, and in so many different areas. If you look at the screen in front of you, and I'm looking at the off the track, the first photo we've got in front of us. Now, we had a talk from Boyd yesterday about his success eventing. Now, not that we're competitive, but yeah, we are. We've got a really good event horse at home. We have one at Rio too. But actually, more importantly, it's all about what people think and getting this message across. And you get lucky sometimes, and we have a lot of show classes at home, around 300. And we had a show class at Royal Windsor Show, and Her Majesty the Queen won the race and won the class. Now, actually, that's quite an important message. 15 years ago, she hadn't even bought into this. She didn't understand that there was a life after racing. Now, she is very proactive in this. And this horse that won, well, that's been winning lots of classes, but she will find something else. This is a message that takes a long time to get across. And if that's one thing we have learnt at home with ROR, that is just not something you set up and it runs. This has taken, in our case, 15 years to get some of these messages across to our own industry, to the equestrian world. So while we must promote the successes, we must back this up with education. Because actually, if you promote something, you must educate people. You've got to help people. So get the workshops, get the clinics going, all those sorts of things we need to do to back this up. No education, and you have welfare. The road to IFAR, well, it started at home with a television. They shoot horses, don't they? And our jockey club responded very quickly and set up retraining of racehorses. As I said, it's taken a long time. It took us time to get the funding together, the module, the vision, but actually it served as a template for a lot of other countries to pick up now. We made mistakes. We're the first people, so we were probably going to make mistakes, and we have, and we've learned from them. And now we've got IFAR, the seed for IFAR, and the road to IFAR. That has to be that it was from horses traveling so much, and then wondering where they were going to turn, what was going to happen when they went to another country. There's people at home have these horses. They train them, they own them, they ride them, they look after them. They were querying what's going to happen when they finish up somewhere else. We all have a responsibility, and wherever our horse finishes its racing life, that there is aftercare. What is the ROR vision, the IFAR vision, sorry? What is it? It's a forum for discussion. It has a mission. It has objectives. And traceability, there was a great talk yesterday by Elliot on traceability. We all need to have traceability from birth till death. That is so important. It was one of the first questions in 2002 we were asked by a journalist. Well, what happens? What are your numbers? We still don't know that at home. I'm still guessing that numbers we're dealing with on an annual basis. That's not good enough. This all started with a cup of coffee, really, 3 years ago, that there should be something done about aftercare worldwide. And that's gone through with the help of Godolphin to symposiums in Kentucky, and then on to Newmarket last year, and the launch of IFAR. And the progress that's been made since, actually, well, even Kentucky, really, and we heard two great presentations from the Japanese and the French this morning, who, I have to be honest, weren't even thinking about it till Kentucky in 2015. They've made enormous strides to get where they are now. And we can all learn from each other. There are cultural differences. What works for us might not work for the Japanese and vice versa, and the French. Everyone has a different culture and a different way of doing this, but we can all learn, and we should. So what is the conclusion? Well, I've written here that one of the really important points that particularly we've learned over the last couple of days, and we've heard some great presentations of what people are doing and their ideas, but that's not going to work unless your racing jurisdictions buy into this. They're the people leading this. You out there, you need to understand that this is really, really important, because without this, there might not be racing. We need to take this really, really seriously. So all those good ideas with people that are doing things in your countries, you need to, as authorities, embrace this and help them succeed with this. I can't emphasize enough how really, really important in the days that where we are now, that this must happen. Every racing jurisdiction, and there's 66 of racing countries out there, every single one of those needs to buy into this and have some sort of aftercare program. So if that's the message today for you to take home, please do so. And I hope next time that when we have another chance to speak, that so many more countries will have this program in place. I'd like to thank you all very much for listening. And I'd now like to introduce Michael Blowen, and I know it's going to be a great talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to talk here today. All the other people involved in Aftercare have done all the hard work. Their presentations for the last couple of days have been really amazing about the different alternatives and the different kinds of things that we can do to for these great racehorses once they've retired. So I get here and talk about how much fun I have with them. They don't have to do anything when they come to my farm except eat carrots. We started Old Friends 13 years ago. I was sitting on the sofa and I said to Diane, my wife, I said, you know, it'd be really good to have a place where these old stallions can go, because nobody's really got a place for them, and they need to get retired, and they're celebrities. And I'd covered the movies for the Boston Globe for a couple of decades, and I knew what people were like around celebrities, and I never got that excited about meeting movie stars, but I sure do get excited about meeting some of these amazing racehorses. So I thought we would call it Old Friends, so I called Barbara Livingston, the Eclipse Award-winning photographer, and asked her if she minded if I stole her title for her book and named the farm Old Friends, because I thought it conveyed a very nice message about our relationship with these wonderful thoroughbreds. And she agreed. And now she's mad at me because now everybody thinks her book's named after the farm. I'd also like to thank the Daily Racing Forum for producing this magazine for us. There's some available out in the lobby. It has the stories of a lot of the great racehorses here, and I'm not going to stand up here and thank everybody that needs to be thanked, otherwise we'd be here for days and you'd be bored out of your minds. But I really would like to take a minute to talk about our great relationship with the Japanese Blood Horse Breeders Association, the Japanese Racing Association, and Mr. Yoshida at the Shidai Stallion Station, because they've allowed us, they've donated retired American stallions that retired in Japan to come back to the United States. We've had 9 come back, including Derby and Preakness winners Silver Charm and War Emblem, and some of the greatest horses that ever lived are now in my backyard. I'd like to introduce for a second this video that we did to try and give people an idea of what we try to accomplish at Old Friends. And I'd also like to remind you that there's nothing like a visit to the farm to see them, because it's a thrill to see them, and it's a thrill to be around them every day. And I love to show the farm to people who actually know what they're looking at. So if you don't mind, take a minute to look at this video, and I'll be back momentarily.
Chasing dreams. I think that's probably the most romantic thing about being at the racetrack in the morning. It's so quiet, so peaceful, so serene. It really is a study in extremes. Any given morning, the next superstar could be galloping past you because of the possibilities. That everyone out there is chasing a dream, and you just don't know what any horse is going to end up being. Silver Charm came storming down the stretch. And
you know, you have the first Saturday in May, lasts 2 minutes and change.
The gate opened and War Emblem went right to the front and led all the way.
It's really great to look at the past and look at War Emblem's Derby and Silver Charm and everything, but really what you have to do is keep looking forward. These horses live to be 30 years old, so there's many more minutes and many more days beyond the first Saturday in May and beyond that, and I think that's really, really important. At the end of the day, a lot of these horses weren't getting the kind of treatment that I thought they might deserve. And so I started thinking about it. And so I decided we'd try and start Old Friends and we'd take stallions.
Michael's dream was something else altogether. A wonderful idea, tougher to accomplish. A retirement home for horses that had accomplished much on the racetrack.
We've had our ups and downs. I mean, you know, when I first started this, people thought this is the craziest idea they ever heard of. So you picked a nice day, huh? Thanks for coming. You know, we started with one horse. Now we have 164. I just adore this. I mean, it's like you fall in love. I mean, that's what happens. You never know what's going to happen.
What Michael has found is a way to give back to these horses, give back to these racing stars. Tradition means so much, history means so much, and these horses, you know, they're just watching them on that farm, being able to visit, maybe feed them an apple or a peppermint or pet them on the nose. It's living history.
And this horse is really just amazing. Such a thrill, such an opportunity. These are celebrities. I never got that excited about the movie stars, but I'm totally enthralled with these horses, and I do get starstruck around. He starts talking to me when I'm not doing it quick enough. What? All right. Quick run and then we'll eat. Come on, touch goal. Come on, buddy, we got carrots. Hey, stop it. You get my kiss? Can I get my kiss? Thanks, that's pretty perfunctory. Can we get a little more action there? I can't imagine having more fun than this.
Those visits to old friends allow the people who come to see those horses to appreciate that and savor what they accomplished and again thank them a little bit for what happened on the racetrack. Old Friends and the work of Michael, I think they combine to be one of the most wonderful things about our industry.
I think all these horses are proven that they're very valuable. There's so many horses that could use a place like this.
The foundation for all of it is the love of the horse, the love of thoroughbred racing, and respect for what these horses have accomplished in their careers.
Yeah, that kind of gives you some idea. I mean, I didn't get into this because I loved horses. I got into it because I liked drinking and gambling. I started loving the horses a lot later. But I think one of the things that we proved is that these horses have value. We've heard a lot about second careers and third careers. I'm on my fourth, I guess. But this is their third career for a lot of these horses, and I consider retirement a legitimate career. And when we started figuring out that people would come from all over the world to visit these horses, we realized that it was an integral part of the Old Friends experience was to get involved with tourism. We've got tremendous support from Scott County and Georgetown Tourism. Expedia.com just named us the one thing you have to see when you come to Kentucky. We started charging for the tours 2.5 years ago, started charging $10, and I told people, look, why don't you, when you come, if you don't like it, I'll give you $20 on your way out, and nobody's asked me for it yet. The first 6 months that we charged for the tours, we raised about $23,000. The next year, we raised about $60,000. The next year, we raised about $120,000, and this year, we're well on our way to raising $250,000 just in terms of admissions to the farm. And that, I think, is part of the key to the whole thing. I mean, I believe these horses are priceless, but unless we can figure out a way that they can generate income once their racing and breeding careers are over, then it's going to be a dead end. Because if you're always asking people for money, if you've always got the tin cup out, no matter how much they like the idea or love the horses, eventually they're going to go to the other side of the street and they're not going to put anything in your cup. That said, one of the wonderful things that I've learned is racing is based on competition on every level. The veterinarians compete, the breeding farms compete, the horses obviously compete, the jockeys compete, the feed stores compete, the auction houses compete, everybody competes. When these horses come to our farm, that is over. And they spend their whole lives being trained to do something, trained to race, trained to breed. When they come to our farm, they learn that the shoe's on the other foot, and they train us. They train us to tell us when they want something, how they want it, and how to be treated. And their personalities completely change. I remember 13 years ago when I started, I didn't know anything about what I was doing, and I went to see Governor Brereton Jones, who, of course, is a wonderful racing horseman and breeder at Airdrie Stud. And I sat with him for a minute, and he said to me, okay, let me get this straight. You're going to get these horses, right? I said, yes. And he goes, and you're not going to race them? No. And you're not going to sell them? No. And you're not going to breed them? No. He says, what exactly are you going to do? And I said, well, I'm going to put them in my yard and hope people come and visit. And it took a little bit longer than I thought it might, but now that's precisely what's happening. And I think within the next year or two, we'll be totally self-sufficient in terms of tourism, in terms of our gift shop, and we sell shares in these horses for $100. They get a picture and a certificate. And so I tell people all the time, I said, people go to the sale all the time looking for a horse to win the Kentucky Derby. I said, I'll sell you a share in a Derby winner for $100. And fortunately, before they've thought about what that actually means, they've given me $100. So, the other thing that's really, really important is the relationships we've developed with people in racing. I don't look at us as antithetical to racing. I don't criticize racing. Of course, people have talked about it all day today, but I'm in a fortunate position of loving racing. I went from a kid who just threw away a Sports Illustrated when there was a horse on the cover to realizing that horse racing is the greatest sport ever invented. And we have the greatest athletes performing, both human and equine. But the competition, when they come to the farm, it not only ends for the horse, it ends for everybody else. And this is one of the great examples, I think. And this is a one thing that you might be able to take back to your various venues and look at. Our veterinarian, Dr. Waldridge, has been our veterinarian for 2 years, our chief veterinarian, and he's never sent us a bill. Park Equine, equine clinic, both with places in Paris and in Versailles in Kentucky, has done 3 colic surgeries for us and picked up horses in the middle of the night, and they've never sent us a bill. Tribute Feed gives us tremendous discounts on feed. Fasig-Tipton gave us $50,000 when our barn burned down so we could build a good barn. I think with all the emphasis on competition while their careers are at their peak and as we're all vying for position in the racing industry, it's if you sat back for a second and thought, you know, what if we don't compete for a couple of days and see how we could cooperate and take a lesson from these horses that teach me things, new things every day. You know, the other word that's been used throughout this procedures today, and I've noticed Kenny McPeak used it and Tom Durkin, a lot of people have used the word fun. And when people come to the farm, I want them to have fun because they're not going to remember a lot of statistics. They're going to remember maybe that they fed a carrot to a Derby winner like Silver Charm, who's just adorable. They're going to remember, you know, some specific thing about a betting, maybe a betting coup that they had. In fact, we had a guy, his name Mr. Soroka, and he was in charge of the Georgetown walking, running, drinking, and intellectual club. And the only thing that was really required was showing up at the brewery. Unfortunately, he died, and his family came to us, and they said, do you have Sarava at your farm? And of course, we have War Emblem, and then we have Sarava who beat him in the Belmont, and we have Silver Charm, and we have Touch Gold who beat him in the Belmont, so we have our own version of the Triple Crown. But anyway, so we have Sarava there, and his family came to me with an idea, and I went along with it, and they installed a bench overlooking Sarava's paddock after Mr. Soroka died, with his picture on it and his dates. And the reason that they did it was because he bet $100 on Sarava to win the Belmont Stakes, and Sarava paid $142.50. He said it was the greatest day of his life, and now the memorial is sitting right above Sarava's paddock. So people are always coming up with wonderful ideas on how to relate to these great animals and to continue to allow the sport of racing to grow in the ways that it should be growing. You know, I just on a personal note, I would just like to thank everybody that's ever donated $2 or donated a horse to us, to realize that they come to the farm and they see that the horses are really, really well taken care of. I mean, Bob Baffert came here the Thursday before American Pharoah won the Kentucky Derby. He pointed to Silver Charm. He looked down at his son, Bodie, and he said, Bodie, you weren't even born when that horse won the Derby, when he won the Preakness, when he won the Dubai World Cup, but he's the reason you can have so much junk in your room. So we've been, you know, the day after the Derby, you know, Terry Finley and some of the people from Always Dreaming were there. Jack Knowlton, who owned Funnyside, came to the farm. Sandy Hawley and Chris McCarron and John Cruguet came to the farm just so that they could express their adoration and their respect for these great animals. I just ran into Ramon Dominguez in the hallway. You know, we have two horses that he really adores, Little Mike and Fabulous Strike at the farm. So everybody's got connections to these wonderful animals. And I can't thank you enough for allowing me to have the thrill of a lifetime every day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Blowen. Thank you very much. Thank you. Nobody can deny the equine DNA in our next speaker. Son of Cowboy Hall of Fame, he grew up surrounded by the great American horse. I had the privilege and honor to work with him at the time of the rebuilding of Maroñas racetrack in Uruguay 15 years ago, where I learned amazing skills and value from which I'm most thankful. Respected and beloved all around this continent, he came back from Uruguay to become president and general manager of Remington Park. He will share his observations on how horse racing can coexist and prosper alongside gaming operations, as well as detailing the landscape from Racino operations in the future. Please welcome Mr. Scott Wells.
Well, thank you, Pablo, for that generous introduction. And at this time, I want to thank, on behalf of Global Gaming Solutions, which is a Delaware company owned in its entirety by the unconquered and unconquerable Chickasaw Nation, owners of both Remington Park and Lone Star Park. I want to thank the Jockey Club, the Latin American Racing Channel, and all the wonderful sponsors who have helped make this event possible. You know, it's through gatherings like these that we're able to see beyond our countries and our cities' borders, and to also see beyond what are sometimes our own limited visions and viewpoints in the industry. It's for someone like me that runs 2 racetracks and concentrates on the ebbs and flows of the popularity of racing, sometimes it gets a little bit depressing to see some of the declining numbers. But as I was working with Pablo and Horacio and the others in Uruguay and in Argentina and the other places in South America where I've worked, in Chile and Peru and Mexico and Panama, I've seen a tremendous enthusiasm for racing horses. And any of you who attended this event 2 years ago and witnessed the remarkable, unforgettable moment of American Pharoah winning the Triple Crown for the first time in 37 years, none of you will ever forget that day, and I think it was clear that America's passion, or the United States' passion for horse racing, was alive and on display at that time. Yeah, I consider myself the luckiest man in the world. I have lived my life and made my living in the shadow of what I consider the most noble animal on the face of the planet. My father was a cowboy turned horse trainer, a man with an 8th grade education who earned his PhD in horses, and through his horsemanship and his integrity, carved out a living for his family on the tough and low-dollar circuits of the southwestern United States. Although he was posthumously inducted into the Hall of Fame of the American Quarter Horse Association for his skills as a trainer and a breeder, during the time my sisters and I were growing up, we lived a nomadic life, moving from state to state, wherever our horses were good enough to compete. Like most trainers, my father did not want me to follow in his footsteps and be a racehorse trainer, nor did I intend to, until a specific event in Paris in 1971. Now, I had foolishly dropped out of college, was on full academic scholarship with a paved road to a career as a corporate attorney, and gone to France to seek the meaning of life and to write the great American novel, and maybe to find a couple of French girls along the way, which I had mixed success with. But there was one day when I was walking through the streets of Paris, and I was struck by something that was unusual. It was the smell of horses. And as I rounded the corner, I saw a squadron of mounted soldiers on beautiful, well-groomed horses, and the sights and the sounds and the smells of those horses encouraged me to go to the races, something I had avoided doing in the months that I had been there previously. So a few days later, some friends and I went to Longchamp, and we were in the infield watching races, drinking a little wine, making a few minimum bets, when, as the horses rounded the turn for home in a certain race, the horse that was trailing stumbled and fell. And instinctively, because I had been raised caring for horses, I vaulted the rail, and I ran over to him. I could see that the jockey was okay, and so I did what I had seen my old friend veterinarians do in the past. I reached into his mouth, pulled his tongue away to clear his throat, and then I raised his front leg, and as I dropped it, I pounced on his rib cage with my knees. It's a form of resuscitation. And I did that 4 or 5 times because I had seen that the horse's nostrils weren't moving. He had gone something into oxygen deficit and his nostrils weren't moving, he wasn't breathing. But after 4 or 5 examples of that exercise, his nostrils did start moving. He breathed for a moment and he got up. I gathered up the reins, and about that time, the trainer and what I assume was the veterinarian arrived. I handed them the reins, and I vaulted back over the rail. And in that specific moment, my whole life changed. At that moment, I realized that I knew what I was. There wasn't any identity crisis going on. I was a horseman. It was undeniable. I had it in my genes, as Pablo said, and I was hooked right then, and it never left me in all those years since. So soon after that, when I returned to the United States a few months later, I attended a horse sale, and I met a young man named D. Wayne Lucas, dressed in plaid pants and smoked sunglasses, and he was quite a standout there in New Mexico at that time, I must say. But we hit it off well, and he offered me a job as an assistant trainer. So I traveled with him to California, and after some lean times, we moved into Los Alamitos and started winning a few races, and then we won our share of races, and then we began to win more than our share of races, until such time as I thought I was ready to strike out on my own. I was hooked. The magic of racing had me under its spell, and it would never let me go. So I trained horses from coast to coast for 17 years, and I wouldn't trade those years for anything. But evolution sometimes takes place in unpredictable ways. I had another epiphany years later on a brutally cold winter morning just down the road at Bowie Racecourse in Maryland. It was 2 degrees Fahrenheit that morning. I had a pretty mediocre stable at that time. It was what the football coaches call a rebuilding year. And I was galloping a very tough gray horse, and my goggles frosted over from my breath, so I pulled them down. Then the tears, as they formed around my eyes, began to freeze, and my eyeballs began to ache. So I closed my eyes for a few seconds, and I realized that was crazy. So I finally pulled that horse up and took him back to the barn, and my fingers were so cold, I couldn't untie the knot in my reins. And I had that second epiphany. In that very moment, I decided to walk away from training horses and to try a 6-month experiment in working on the front side with management. I called my friend Corey Johnson, who was at that time the assistant general manager at the brand new Remington Park, to ask him for a job. Well, Corey didn't have anything at that time. It was a new place. He was fully staffed and with people that were dying to work there. But he knew I had written for some racing publications, so he suggested I try to get on with the daily racing form. As it happened, they were running the Frank J. DeFrancis Memorial, one of the premier sprint races in the country, that very day. And I drove over to Pimlico and watched the race, went home, grabbed my typewriter, I'm not even sure if it was electric, I doubt it, and typed out the story on that race. And I FedExed it, which was the fastest way you could get anything anywhere at that time. I FedExed it to the Daily Racing Form, to the editor, John McAvoy. About a week later, I got a letter asking me to call him. I asked to be assigned to Remington Park, where I went and wrote 5 columns a week for the Daily Racing Form for very meager pay, until an opening came available, and Keith Chamblin, who's here today somewhere, allowed me to become his assistant in the press box. Well, without further detail, fast forward 27 years later, and that 6-month experiment is still going on. I tell you this in the interest of full disclosure, because on the subject of the Racino Experience, I am definitely not an unbiased objective. Today, we talk about the term globalization as if it were something new. But the admiration of and the dependence on horses existed before people even knew the earth had the shape of a globe. It goes much farther back than that. For 100 centuries, horses have carried humans through history around the globe. Their meat, their milk, their hair, their hides have provided sustenance. And that, in some locales, that's still true. For thousands of years, the world land speed record was held by someone riding a horse. And superiority in hunting, agriculture, exploration, commerce, and war all depended on the quality of horses an individual or a tribe or a nation possessed. Now, if you charted the history of man on the width of this room, the portion in which horses have not been essential to survival would be about this much of that timeline. Because it was only about 120 years ago that the industrial age gave way to the automotive age. And of course, that changed the whole necessity of horses. They were relegated to sport and entertainment, and thank goodness for that. Otherwise, there might just be a few of them on display in zoos. But thanks to people like you, they're still here in great numbers, treasured around the world for their beauty, their power, and their spirit. And it's up to us to make sure that that evolution does not push them aside. So how does this sentimental diatribe of mine relate to the subject of the Racino Experience. You know, if you look up the word Racino, it takes you back only 15 or 20 years. But my father told me a story as a kid which better illustrates the essence of the concept. 70 years ago, when he was just a 23-year-old cowboy working on a ranch in West Texas, he took the only horse that belonged to him to a little mountain village in New Mexico called Ruidoso. 70 years ago. There he won a race at the odd distance of 3 1/2 furlongs. He said that between the purse money and the money he bet on his horse, he came away with about $300, which was about 10 months of a cowboy's pay at that time. Now, I used to love to hear that story when I was a kid, but he didn't tell me the whole story. In his later years, he did. He told me the rest of the story. He admitted that that night, he lost all his winnings playing the illegal slot machines in a bar called, ironically, the Win, Place, and Show, which still exists. In all likelihood, I must say that something very similar probably happened at Remington Park or some other Racino around this country in the last 24 hours. There is competition for the gaming dollar. So the dichotomy between racetracks and casinos is not nearly as new as the term Racino. And the competition for the gambling dollar is nothing new. Now, personally, I much prefer the thrill of a horse race to the spinning reels of a slot machine. But undeniably, I'm in the vast minority on that subject. And it all boils down to human nature. Most people prefer the path of least resistance. And that appears to be increasingly true as instant gratification seems to be the most valued aspect in the entertainment world of today. Now, for years, racing had a monopoly on legal gambling. But the landscape has changed dramatically, as we all know. I mean, 40 years ago, most U.S. citizens had the option of 3 basic TV channels, and while today there are hundreds. The internet, of course, has exponentially expanded visual entertainment at a very, very low price. And children who grow up playing handheld games of various sorts tend to stick to those handheld games and don't go through, or not willing to go through, not interested in going through the trials and tribulations of riding horses or dealing with horses, unless they're born into the industry, like someone like Tony Bullrich there, or many of the people in this room who've had their toes stepped on and their fingers nibbled at and so on. But they're missing out on something, and we can't expect that to change. And of course, there's been a proliferation of gambling opportunities for everyone. Whereas for many, many years, Las Vegas and Atlantic City were the only places that allowed gambling, now that pie has been divided into thousands of pieces. The term Racino has been described or defined as a marriage between casino gambling and horse racing. So how does a marriage usually work out when one of the partners is decades older and much slower than the other? When one of the partners loves to read and study while the other likes noise, flashing lights, and ceaseless, thoughtless action, especially when one of the partners makes a lot more money a lot more easily than the other. A marriage like that can last, but it's rare and it takes a lot of work. So how would an unbiased businessman, unlike me, assess this Racino paradox? In my own state, my home state of Oklahoma, where there are 124 casinos and 2 racinos, the casinos pay a tax rate of 6%, while the racinos pay 22% to purses and 22% to the state. The normal casinos can operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, while the racinos can currently operate no more than 18 hours a day. The racing product operates with a takeout of at least 20%, while the casinos hold about a third of that percentage, 6 or 7%. Now, given a choice between which business to own, it would seem a no-brainer, but it's not that simple. Here's another aspect of the evolution of racinos. It's a truth people would prefer to ignore, but beginning with the arrival of the Spanish conquerors in the 1500s, all across the U.S., the native peoples were brutally slaughtered and driven off their homelands. 39 of those tribes were relocated to what was then called Indian Territory. But once oil was discovered there, that territory was also opened up to European exploration. The method used was something called the land rush. The last of these was staged in Oklahoma in 1889, when at the firing of a cannon, 50,000 horses carried men and women racing across the prairies and the hills, carrying men and women who would stake their claims to what had previously been Native American lands. It has been called the largest horse race of all time, but in reality, it was just another invasion. In 1907, that place was named Oklahoma as our 47th state. Somehow, I think that's right. Somehow the tribe survived, although under very repressive conditions. And it was decades later when the Federal Indian Gaming Act was enacted, and even then, those 124 casinos didn't just jump out of the ground. Now, I should have seen my future on the wall 25 years ago when I was just about to leave Remington Park, where I was working, to go to Hollywood Park. And just before I left, I drove down to a little town called Goldsby, Oklahoma, a town of only a few hundred, and there was a big bingo hall there because bingo had been allowed, charitable bingo had been allowed suddenly, and the Chickasaw Nation was experimenting with that. And I saw but I'd heard there was something unusual going on, I'll admit. And I went there, and there was a vast bingo hall, about 3 times the size of this room, and every seat was full, and people were frantically marking their 4 and 5 bingo cards. But in another room off to the side, I saw what had lured me down there, the rumors of which had lured me down there. And I went in a little room with about an 8-foot ceiling, and I could hardly see through the cigarette smoke, and it was standing room only. And what I saw at the back was that the man in charge, there was a hopper blowing the ping pong balls around, just as they do in normal bingo. And he would draw out a ball, and instead of having G23 or B4 or whatever on it, they weren't marked like bingo numbers. They were marked with K, Q, J, 10, 9, 8, 7, and so on. They were marked like playing cards. And they were playing blackjack with ping pong balls. And somehow they called it Bingo Jack. And somehow that made it passable as a bingo game. Well, that little endeavor was the seed from which grew the gigantic Oklahoma tribal gaming empire. There are now 124 casinos, as I said, all of them but 2 tribal. And what happened then was that they took bingo in that form, and they formed Class II machines, electronic gaming machines, which operated on the possibilities of a bingo card. And until recently, every machine in Oklahoma had a little square on it that showed a bingo card in the lower left-hand corner. And of course, since then, they've graduated to Class III gaming, and fortunately, as they graduated, we were able to do so too. But what happened with that proliferation of tribal gaming in Oklahoma was that Remington Park's fortunes plummeted. Suddenly, they weren't the only legal place in the state to make a bet. This went on for years until Remington Park was on the verge of closure. And what was forming was a desperate effort by the horsemen in the state to have a level playing field. And they threatened to do an all-out political campaign to try to get equal rights with the tribal casinos. And sensing how costly that campaign was going to be for everybody involved, some wise people, among them Corey Johnson and Governor Bill Anatubby of the Chickasaw Nation and many other tribal leaders and horseman leaders, got around a table and decided to come up with a compromise. And they called it State Question. It became State Question 712, and it passed by a 60-40 margin in the fall of 2004. When I left Moronius in the spring or the winter of 2005, I was called to have the opportunity to take over as president and general manager of Remington Park. And by the end of the following November, we opened the Remington Park Casino. Now, just as most casino professionals don't understand the intricacies of racing horses, most horsemen don't understand the intricacies of running a casino. Any casino requires an enormous and ongoing investment. One of the main things that horsemen think you plug a casino in the day you get the rights to have it, and it just starts printing money ceaselessly, and therefore everything should work out great. They don't realize that every few months you need to refresh your floor. You need to make great investments in time and energy and money to keep things fresh. You have to spend a fortune marketing, especially if you have 123 other competitors. It also, having a Racino or a casino involves considerable risks. I would say the first among those is the possibility of legislative reversals. And our friends from Canada here are aware better than anyone else probably of the danger of that. When suddenly with their Racino legislation, horsemen were making great investments, everything was going swimmingly, and the government decided to cut back or to withdraw that supplement to the racing industry. It sent things into a panic. A lot of people felt betrayed because they had made these great investments, and suddenly after their investments, the rules had changed. And as we know, breeding horses it's anything but instant gratification. You plan a mating, you buy a mare, you plan a mating, you do the mating, it's a year before the foal is born, it's 2 more years before that horse has a chance to make you a nickel, and all that time you've been spending money on it. So a lot of people were left in the lurch, and fortunately the government saw fit to reverse their reversal, and I think things are going well there again now. Another risk is unexpected competition. I use the example of Delaware. Delaware was well on their way, being one of the first states to have a successful Racino model. And then suddenly, right next door in Pennsylvania, 61,000 slot machines were authorized at their racetracks. And it's happened now in other nearby states, which of course is a risk that you can't possibly foresee. And then a further risk, of course, is our lotteries and economic downturns like the one we had in 2008. There are also ways you can sabotage your own Racino. I've been asked to touch upon some best practices, so here are some I've learned from my own experiences. Number one, don't overcharge your customers for their entertainment. Does anyone know what murmuration means? If you see a flock of birds or a school of fish all turn the same direction simultaneously, that's called a murmuration. I promise you, slot machine customers are just like that. If you tighten your slot machines up just a little bit and they start spending less time and losing their money a little more quickly, they will turn just like a flock of birds and fly to your competitors. So you can't be greedy. Number two, don't have a divided team. And that's hard to avoid because on the one hand, in most Racino models, you have a casino that's making a healthy profit, and you may very well and probably have a racetrack which is losing money, or certainly not making as much as the casino. This naturally leads to a division on the team. You cannot let that happen. You must try to have a unified team with a unified vision. You have to share the profits of your overall operation. And you have to let the casino people know that, hey, you wouldn't be up 20% this month if our horsemen hadn't just arrived for the season. Let's go back further than that. You wouldn't be here if the horsemen hadn't fought and invested and campaigned to achieve this Racino. So you've got to keep that teamwork spirit going. And at this time, I'd like to pause just for a moment to show you some video from Remington Park. I have an apology to make afterwards, which will be clear, but I want you to go ahead and run that video now if you would. And it gives you a glimpse, not a representative glimpse of Remington Park, and also it will be followed by 3 commercials, and just keep track in your own mind of what these might have in common. You can roll that video, please.
Some people think that when the live racing stops at Remington, half the chances to win go away. Fact is, they double. From now through February, you'll get double points on your Lucky Circle card on Sundays and Mondays, with double the free play when you redeem them on Wednesdays. Double points Sundays and Mondays, with double free play on Wednesdays. That's enough to keep your heart racing all winter long. Only at Remington Park. Let your heart race again.
It appears none of you have left Remington for the off-season. So this winter, we're going to turn it into some training time. You will work on your balance, you will watch what you eat, and you will do 1,000 sit-ups a day. Any questions?
Hey, Sergeant Major, what's that?
What?
With so much going on this off-season,
Oh, you little...
your heart will race all winter long, too. Only at Remington.
The jockeys have left Remington Park for the summer, and the renovators have arrived for the casino. But there's something a little different about these renovators. Although it looks like they're working hard, seems like they're more interested in turning our renovations into one big, fun party. And with Travis Pastrana's Nitro Circus live in Oklahoma for the first time ever, July 1st, the party is bound to get bigger and wilder, only at Remington Park.
Last off-season, some jockeys spent a little too much time in the casino. So this off-season at Remington, it's a jockey-free zone.
Not a chance, boys.
We're here for the pantomime.
Then again, some rules are just made to be broken. Come join in the fun at Remington this summer, even if you are a jockey, and let your heart race all summer long.
Okay, my apology goes like this. I've managed to offend at least two of our most important sponsors. Number one, not one of the horses you saw in that commercial, in any of those commercials, were registered with the Jockey Club. Those were all quarter horses or paints. And number two, none of them were sired by Adena Springs Stallions, so I apologize for that. But the point I'm trying to make is that the Racino model was very, very beneficial to Remington Park and to the Oklahoma horse racing industry. Our purses rose by 400%. Our export rose by 300%. And our live handle rose by 30%, even though we found that 40% of our top 250 players spent 35 to 40% of their former play on slot machines. So it's undeniably, it's been proven over and over again, the slots, or the crossover between racing and slots is about 25 to 30%, whereas the crossover between slots players to racing is only about 5% if you really do a good job of it. And probably based on similar figures to that, opponents of Racino's justifiably object that basing your business on slot machines will just keep eroding interest in horse racing. And that's a difficult argument to dispute. But let me just say that not only have I had the Racino experience, I've had the non-Racino experience too for the last 4 years as general manager and president of Lone Star Park. As anyone knows who attended the Breeders' Cup at Lone Star in 2004, it's a fabulous $96 million facility, and our current owners have invested probably $25 million in it since they bought it in 2011. However, Texas is surrounded by Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico, all of which have additional gaming to help support their purses at their racetracks. And that has been catastrophic for the Texas horse racing industry. A move was made last year to try to adopt something called historical horse racing. And it's a pari-mutuel thing based on the results of former races. And Texas politicians almost unanimously had one hand like this and the other hand like this, taking donations from politicians in other states and especially from casino interests in other states. And Texas has been held at a standstill. And that leads me to what I consider the next step in the evolution. The fact is that in most jurisdictions, we are not being allowed to sell our own product in the most modern and productive way. Because a live horse race every 25 minutes is the traditional way to sell horse racing, too many of us are stuck in the notion that it's the only way. But our product is not just the visual experience of watching a race. You have to look deeper than that. In actuality, our product is the results of the races. It's the results of the races which are our core product. In essence, a horse race is just a beautiful stampede until the results of the race are declared official. The results of the race are what determines the winners and losers, the distribution of the mutual pools, and the distribution of the purse monies. Ultimately, it's the results of the races which determine the values of the horses and their offspring. Let's look at it like this. The tangible aspects of our businesses, those horses and that racetrack, are of no value until we join together and run races. And under the traditional scenario, once the results of the single race are determined, a few dollars goes to the purse account and a few dollars goes to the racetrack to cover expenses. Then, the results of the race are filed away forever. But it doesn't have to be that way. Fortunately, we have an opportunity to help push evolution our way. It began at Oaklawn Park as instant racing and has now taken other forms which continue to evolve. Historical horse racing gives us the opportunity to sell our real product, the results of the race, repeatedly and in a modern, fast-paced way, which is what the marketplace demands. As long as it's done in a pari-mutuel way, it has essentially already been approved in all racing jurisdictions. This innovation has been successful everywhere it's been implemented. Just look at Oaklawn Park, which was on the brink of bankruptcy or the brink of closure until they were able to implement instant racing. Look at Kentucky Downs. They race 5 or 6 days a year, but they conduct the historical racing based on the results of the races which we own, and they do simulcasting year-round, and they're giving the biggest purses in the country. Not to allow racetracks to have historical horse racing and present their product in a modern way is a restriction of fair trade. It allows other businesses to improve their method of sales and to keep horse racing bound in a century-old set of handcuffs just because we want to sell our product in a modern package and at a more modern pace. Moreover, historical horse racing by definition can only be done at racetracks and their approved outlets. And that means there likely will not be a saturation in the market at every restaurant and every bar, as is so often the case with slot machines. In the historical horse racing scenario, it won't just be the gambling companies benefiting from the activity. Historical horse racing should be a crucial next step in the evolution of parimutuel wagering. And it will be a step which will add dramatically to purses, to the viability of racetracks, and to the ongoing breeding and races of the planet's most magical animal, the racehorse. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Scott, thank you for this wonderful presentation and to share all your life almost in it. So it's been very, very, very nice to listen it. A few questions that we've been listening around these days, which is a very hot topic for us. And your knowledge will help us to understand. We'd like to know if you agree that there's a feeling in some jurisdictions that the racing industry is used by gaming corporations as a vehicle to achieve great earnings and forgetting through time their commitments with the industry. What is your opinion on this? Do you think this is a problem that some tracks are facing?
Well, I do think it may be a problem that some tracks are facing. I won't name names, but I know there's some tracks on the selling block right now that have indicated just such an occurrence. Speaking from my own experience, Remington Park was purchased by the Chickasaw Nation, 7 years ago now, and they've put over $200 million into their racetracks. And they had 16 or 17 casinos already. They didn't need to buy a racetrack. They saw an opportunity to have a good business model outside their traditional tribal casinos, even with all of the disadvantages that I mentioned that the Racinos have. We still run a profitable business, even with 2 racetracks, and one of them not doing so well in Texas. But the one in Remington, the one in Oklahoma, is doing quite well. And although it's not as lucrative, perhaps, as some of the other casinos they own, they know that they're not only entertaining a lot of people, but they're helping keep alive an industry which is very important to our state. And by improving, even at Lone Star Park, which I said, frankly, is not doing that well, they've made probably $25 million in improvements there over the last 6 years. Creature comfort, they want to be proud of what they have. They want people to come and have a good time. And of course, they hope someday they'll have a better business model to operate from.
Okay. So which should be the role of the government and the racing actors to protect the industry on a daily basis, daily with the gaming operator?
Well, I think, again, referring to the argument of free trade, I don't see any reason why any government, if you're a horse breeder and I'm a racetrack owner and we have a product and we want to sell it in a more modernized way, I don't see any reason that that shouldn't be allowed. And frankly, I think it's because of influence from competitors in surrounding states that probably keeps that from happening. So all I would ask of governments and regulators is to get the heck out of the way. Let us operate in a free enterprise system, and we'll play by the rules. We've proven for decades that we play by the rules with our racing operations.
You spoke about this during the presentation, but do you think slots drive people into racing, or it's the opposite, or has no impact?
Well, as I said, there's no denying that in today's culture, with the instant gratification influence so strong, with the path of least resistance and the sort of desire for entertainment without much thought, then no, I don't think, we haven't seen, and despite our best efforts, we haven't driven a lot of people away from the machines over to the racetrack. Now we do, again, touching on the best practices, we do reward our best players with some unusual racing experiences. We do announce on the casino floor when we have a great payoff, especially if it's one of those 10-cent superfectas that pays $20,000. You know, we announce those big payoffs in the casino, and we have customer development people who talk to our top players and say, why don't you give me $24 and I'll go buy you 10 superfecta tickets, 10 superfecta boxes, and we've had some success there where some people have taken an interest in it. But on the other hand, Every time I walk in the casino, from the day we open our stable area until the day the race meet closes, I can walk in the casino at any time and point out 40 or 50 jockeys or jockeys' wives, trainers or trainers' wives, and so on. And a lot of our best horse players get up after the races and go right to the casino. So the crossover from racing to casino play much outweighs the crossover from the other way around.
Okay, okay. So Scott, Racino started approximately 15 years ago, more or less. And do you think this finance entertainment proposal or equation will remain in place for the long term or will evolve? And if so, in which way you think that will happen?
Well, I think it's here to stay. And I think it will evolve, as I was saying in my remarks. I hope it evolves toward an opportunity which, look, in Texas, for decades they fought. I mean, before Oklahoma got Racino legislation, Texas was pushing for it. But then everyone's fingers got in the pie, and the initial idea was to have slots at racetracks, like had been done in Louisiana and Iowa and other places with such great success. But then when everyone got interested in that, saying, well, hey, it's not fair for the racetracks to get that and for us. So then the other lobbying groups, the other industries all jumped on the ship, and they all wanted a piece of it too. And it came to me slowly, but when it finally did come to me, because everyone knows that a historical racing machine is not going to be quite as productive as a Class 3 slot machine. But when it occurred to me that, you know what, historical racing can only be done at racetracks. And there's 3 major racetracks in Texas. And if they're 20% or 15%, if the HHR, the historical racing terminals, are let's say 20% less productive than your Class 3 slots, well, if you're splitting the whole population of people interested, the people who have been driving to Louisiana and Oklahoma and New Mexico for decades, contributing billions and billions of dollars to their industries, why wouldn't it be better to have 3 of them at 20% less and have that whole pie cut into only 3 ways? So I would love to see historical horse racing be the next step in the evolution of this complicated economic complex.
That's good. And knowing the industry, as you know, would you say that having a subsidy from slots, it's better for a racetrack and its community versus having its own casino operation at the track?
Well, since we're not being directly subsidized, it's easy for me to say no, but if I were managing a racetrack in that situation, I certainly wouldn't be biting the hand that feeds me. But in general, people react negatively to the term subsidy. And the scenario that I described, where we would actually be incorporating a new development in the way to sell our own product, would be much less vulnerable to attacks by opposition parties who would say, hey, why should we be giving subsidies to this industry as a favored industry? I don't think that's tenable for the long run.
Okay. Well, I would like now to invite our guest to ask any question to Scott, take care about his knowledge. Horacio. The microphone. It's coming.
En inglés, por favor. Here it comes. Here comes the microphone.
Here. Sorry.
Scott, you know very well I agree with you 100% with all of your statements, but you are a good example in this country as a Racino. What is not clear for me is what you can do when the example is not as good as Remington Park. Sometimes I'm not going to give names, but you know, you go to a racetrack here and you need to walk for half an hour inside the casino to find the racetrack. Or after you have the license, after you make your investments, people who live at the racetrack level start to be citizens of second category, and people who is leading the casino, who is the one who bring the money to you, are gods. So how you can control or what you can do when this happens, because that's what is damaged sometimes the concept of the good racinos, or is damaging the racing industry.
That's a very good question, and I can think of a couple of examples where, the huge racetrack that the constituents of which fought for the legislation and gained the right to have a casino are suddenly pushed into a corner and forgotten about. And from the first, I thought that was really important. And actually, I'll just explain that when we were designing the casino at Remington, some Las Vegas architects were leading the design effort. And, I, as president of the track, was saying, well, I'd like to keep this area open and have it exposed to the finish line and the winner's circle. And I'd like to have this area for our simulcast bettors to be playing, because they may be playing the machines as well. And frankly, I was told at that time by this Las Vegas hotshot, why don't you go back to your office? We've done these casino things before. We don't need you up here. And I called the CEO of the company that owned us that time, and I said, you're trying to get Racino legislation in this state and this state and this state and this state and this state, and this is going to be your first Racino. I think it would behoove you to show the horsemen in the other states that you're not going to build a wall and to take away the windows. You're going to keep racing as part of your integrated product. And the one thing about those commercials I wanted to point out, it's an example of that. Those commercials, every one of them was only run during a time when we didn't have live racing. All that time, which is half the year, we're promoting our place as a unified product. And it goes back to when you form the legislation. I talked about having a unified team operating the place, but even before that, you need to have good teamwork and good partnership with your horsemen, with the whole horse industry in your state, to assure them that you're going to follow procedures and design plans, promotional plans, and everything that are going to continually make them a racetrack with a casino instead of with a casino with a racetrack, but we don't know where it is. You have to form that partnership, number one, to get the votes, usually, and number two, to have a prospering industry as you move forward.
I just want to ask, what role does technology play for you and other tracks these days in getting people to gamble? I know there's Betfair and all these other things, but it doesn't seem it's being publicized or marketed to people. It just seems it's just part of the experience. Can you touch on that? And then, two, for the industry, how important is it that you unify, or you're unified to sort of challenge PASPA and get sports betting legalized in this country? How would that benefit the racinos and the tracks? Thank you.
Well, those are excellent questions. In the first place, I would say I'm not a techie. I know how to pull a horse's tongue out of his throat, right? But I will say that when we did a market study in 2009, and it was advised to me that we cut hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars out of TV advertising and hundreds of thousands of dollars out of newspaper advertising and invest it in social media, I thought they were crazy. But we did it. And that is probably the most useful tool that we've had. 23% of the people at our casino on any given night are 30 years of age or younger. And that is the segment of our demographic that has grown more than any other. And I attribute almost all of that to the use of social media. We reward them when they show up. It's not just about clicks. It's not just about glimpsing us briefly on a screen. It's about giving them something and engaging them to come out, and to come out in groups. We've had great success with that, and we're more dedicated than ever to the social media aspect. And pardon my senior moment. What's the second half of your question was? Oh yeah, sports gambling. Oh my goodness. I mentioned the changing landscape, and something. It's amazing. I go to these various conferences, and you hear about all the changing landscape, and like I failed to do, they failed to mention sports gambling. Now, the guys that were at Remington Park 27 years ago when I was there, after a long absence, I come back, and those guys that were there betting the races every day, they now spend all their money betting on sports. And of course, sports betting isn't legal in Oklahoma or in Texas, but that's what everyone is doing. And I would estimate that 70% of the lost handle from the horse racing industry is going to people playing the sports betting games. And all you have to do is listen to afternoon radio in almost any city you live in. Afternoon sports radio is entirely dominated by advertisements for betting services or handicapping services for the more commonly played sports. And it's not like when people lived on farms, and if you didn't ride a horse yourself, your grandparents had one, and then you got to ride old Joe a time or two, and then as soon as you got on him, you thought maybe you were riding a Kentucky Derby winner, or you pretended you were. No one ever touches a horse anymore. People do play sports, decreasingly so, admittedly, but everyone's familiar with the major sports that we're bombarded with on TV, and the sports betting market has pulled the bulk of funds out of the racing industry. So I think it's extremely important that we incorporate that back into the racetracks that have followed the rules so well and been good regulatory citizens for years.
We are running out of time, and we have room just for one more question, please.
Scott, you made reference to certain ratios of crossover between racing and the casino, and the ratios were about 35% from racing to casino and only 5% from casino to racing. I have two quick questions. One, in your opinion, why is that? And second, there is a sort of feeling in South America in general, in Argentina in particular, that sometimes the marketing for the casino part of a Racino is much more aggressive. You have loyalty programs for gamblers that you don't have when you bet on racing. So I would like to know your opinion, and if this is the reason why the crossover is so different between racing and casinos.
Well, Joe, I've been working at racing marketing for about 30 years, and I think, look, there are good racing promotions, and as we've seen, there are great crowds that turn up for big events, and then if you have so much racing that it's not a big event, I know most tracks in South America race year-round. We race year-round in the United States with a great deal of volume, and that just makes it hard to sell unless it's a special occasion. So that's part of it. But the biggest part of it is simply human nature and the level of thought that people are willing to put into things. If you can sit there and mindlessly push a button and have the hope of making something, and it's happening every few seconds, so you get that little rush of adrenaline every few seconds, that's more attractive to most people in today's society than it is waiting for 25 minutes and running another live race. That's a hard pill for me to swallow, but I can't deny that it's true. So I think if you pick your spots in racing marketing, you can do two things. You'll keep it alive, and you'll keep it exciting for your customers. It's not feeding them the same thing every day. And the other thing is, you will bring in a great many more people that are going to also play your other product, which is the other games. Now, the horsemen wouldn't be complaining about that if the other games they were playing also contributed to purses and also contributed to the industry in a way that was actually based on their product, which is the results of the races. That's why I'm so high on historical horse racing.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, but we're running late, and so thank you, and we'll leave to Luis. Thanks, Scott.
Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for our guest speaker, Scott and Pablo. It's time for our afternoon coffee break and visit to the exhibitor area. But before I release everyone for 25 minutes only, I'd like to remind you that you can get to the exhibition resto from the door at the back of the room, which is take you out to the exhibition in the foyer and also via the door in your wall, which is illuminated for you to see. Above all, to join thanking our coffee break sponsor, Equilotería. Gracias a nuestro patrocinador Equilotería y podrían disfrutar de nuestros 25 minutos solamente de reposo. Gracias. Thank you, everyone.
So what was your vision for coming into the industry with this particular product?
My vision for Equilottery was to bring racing to thousands, millions of people who are not currently exposed to it. That it's a sport that I think is really exciting and can really capture your imagination, but it's, over the years, lost its market penetration. The lottery terminal is such a great distribution opportunity, and while I saw a lot of innovation on the jackpot side, I didn't see as much innovation on the draw experience side. And so being able to innovate that on the lottery side and give lottery a value add, while also obviously giving the racing industry its own value add of great distribution, I think we've really found something here.